Rockford Public School District deals with changes at the federal level that impact local schools. This is one of the topics education leaders talked about Thursday night. WIFR News reporter Anthony Ferretti talks with the RPS board president and attendees who say the education forum is informative, but they would have liked to see a larger turnout.
Thursday's forum comes after President Donald Trump says he's ready to sign an executive order to eliminate the Department of Education and the portion of funds it brings to RPS.
That's clearly worrisome.
Ann Rundle is one of more than 50 people who wanted to find out more on the current state of the Rockford Public School District Board and what improvements can be made for its students and staff.
There's a movement to try to get rid of public education, and that's very dangerous, very dangerous. A democracy only works if we have well-educated voters.
Board President Denise Pearson says they are not taking the news about the Department of Education lightly.
We all know that there is a threat on public education.
Pearson says she plans to talk with RPS's CFO on realistic next steps. She says public schools like RPS only get about 7% of federal funds. The rest comes from the state and property taxes.
We know that the state cannot totally fund public education. At what point will we consider using some reserve funds to meet the needs of our district? So we'll have to see how everything works out.
Attendee Teresa Hill has 2 grandsons in the Rockford school system. She says some of this funding is vital for their learning.
My grandson does have IEPs, and Rockford Public School has done amazing things for him. Absolutely amazing. And it needs to stay there.
As we continue to strive to be proactive as opposed to reactive, we will see greater change in our community.
The forum also featured input on various topics from board members and candidates. One of those was about the initiatives to recruit and retain teachers. One that was praised is that the district pays its student teachers.
Thank you, Anthony. And for those who didn't attend, Transform Rockford plans to post the forum on its YouTube page in the next week or two.